So I wanted to take some time and discuss a particular mindset that I've seen happening a lot among Western fans, one that was brought to my attention very clearly with the release of Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood. And you know, since I've been talking about Fullmetal Alchemist lately with the 2003 review last week and the Brotherhood review coming up this weekend, I figured this would be a good time to talk about the belief that the manga is always better. It's a topic that's been quite a big frustration for me for the last few years now. And while this video might end up coming off as a bunch of incoherent ramblings, I hope that somewhere I'm able to explain this frustration to you guys, whether it's justified or not. So the common belief that I have seen with anime adaptations is no matter how good they are, they cannot live up to the manga from which they are based. Feel free to substitute manga with light novel or visual novel or whatever, because it's all basically the same thing. Now, this mindset, I think, is also being reinforced by a Western belief that the book is always better. So like when Hollywood decides to take a well-liked novel and then turn it into a Hollywood film, it's like, well, the movie may be good, but it is never better than the book. And this belief comes from the fact that most of the time, it's subjectively true. There are a lot of anime adaptations that are not to the same standard as the manga. They aren't. And, you know, of course, there are adaptations where they are quite a bit worse than the manga. However, it is not an absolute truth. Just because an anime may differ from the source material, it does not automatically make it bad or horrible. It's just more likely that it will be so. And the belief in this absolute truth that the manga is always better has led to what I refer to as the Brotherhood Problem. It is named after the belief that I have seen that the 2003 adaptation of Fullmetal Alchemist is not worth your time at all because Brotherhood exists. Now, let's continue by restating my stance on Fullmetal Alchemist. If you've never watched FMA before, or maybe you're debating how you should show it to a friend, a family member, whatever, start with the 2003 adaptation, and then, after a little bit of time has passed, or maybe if you think that it doesn't matter if you repeat watching some plot lines, then go into Brotherhood. And I say this because the difference in pacing between the two shows is very different, and if you end up watching Brotherhood first, it is highly likely that you will not enjoy watching 2003 after the fact. Like, you still can. It's possible. I have seen people that have done it and have enjoyed it, and they're fine. But more often I have seen people just not be able to touch it. And there's no reason to. Unless you are seriously pressed for time, there is no reason why you can't also watch the 2003 version. And I find it very unlikely that you can't find the time. Now, there are people out there who will tell you there was absolutely no reason to watch the 2003 version of Fullmetal Alchemist. Why? Because anything that was good from that version, i.e. anything from the manga, is also in Brotherhood. And that's because the first 13 episodes or so from Brotherhood are stories that are also in the original, and yeah. And, you know, I can kind of see what they're getting at. The obvious point that they are making is that because the 2003 version happened when it did, the writers of that show had to tie up various plot threads in a different way from how the original mangaka would and eventually did do it. So it's not really the Fullmetal Alchemist story, because it didn't technically come from the mangaka. Now, whether you agree with that or not, it doesn't matter. I'm not going to argue with anyone and say that after the divergence, Brotherhood has a better story. I'm not going to do that. But I will say, firstly, how the 2003 anime covered the ending was not bad. It was, for its time, actually really good. And secondly, the episodes that they are shared, the stories that are shared between the two adaptations, are done differently, and in my mind, 2003 did it better. In its opening episodes, Brotherhood felt like it was just rushing to get to the new stuff. There were plotlines, for example, that were cut and then later introduced as short flashbacks. And other plotlines that, quite frankly, deserved time and development were relegated to just single episode stories, despite how important they are to various different character arcs. And, you know, there were other things that just weren't touched on at all. For example, in the past, the mangaka Arakawa has stated that one of her favorite chapters of the manga to draw was actually a side story, Dog of the Military. And despite it being a side story and not actually part of the original manga, it was nonetheless included as part of the plot in the 2003 anime episode Full Metal vs. Flame. Was any of that in Brotherhood? No. Okay, so what else was it in Brotherhood? Well, the Uswell ordeal was completely omitted, despite it being the proper introduction to the character Yoki, who becomes a more important secondary character later on in Brotherhood, and also the battle with the Blue Squad is omitted, even though it's technically the canon introduction to Roy Mustang in both who he is and how he works. And finally, I ask the question of how much time does Brotherhood spend on the Tucker family and the Hughes family? Very little. In fact, the bulk of their development is over by episode 10, despite both families being major motivations for both Roy Mustang and Edward respectively. In face of all of this, I still see people saying that Brotherhood is the definitive adaptation and that the 2003 version is a complete waste of your time just because it doesn't follow the manga in the second half. And we're back to this again, following the manga. It's like the be-all and end-all. Like, back when I was trying to lay out how I should do anime reviews, I did some research into what other people thought made an anime adaptation, or just anime in general, good. And one of the things that I found is that there were a lot of people who had the opinion that in order for an anime to be good, it had to be as close to the original manga as possible, as close to the original material that it could possibly be. And you see, on principle, I don't disagree with that. We are talking about shows that are supposed to be the visual representations of an original material. So yes, they should try to be as close as possible. But what I'm saying is just because they decide to do things differently, or in some cases are forced to do things differently because they ran out of the original material, it does not automatically make this new original thing bad. Let's take a favorite show of mine, Angelic Lair. This series was animated by Bones about 2 years prior to the original FMA, and it was adapted from a manga by the very popular mangaka group known as Clamp. In it, a young girl named Misaki becomes involved in a high-tech game called Angelic Lair, where people control these small, model-sized dolls that fight each other in an arena. Now, by and large, the manga and the anime adaptation are exactly the same, save for one rather important character. In the anime, Misaki's mom, Shoko, left her in the care of her parents shortly after being diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. In leaving, she moves to Tokyo and begins work on a technology that would eventually allow her to build prosthetic legs, to replace those which she lost the function of due to MS. It's explained throughout the show that Shoko's reasoning for not having any contact with Misaki is because her daughter does not yet know about her MS, nor the fact that she is now wheelchair-bound and she doesn't want Misaki to see her in this state when she is so close to a breakthrough. It's a rather believable, if sad, bit of character motivation that is entirely original. None of what I just talked about existed in the manga. Instead, in the manga, Shoko doesn't have any sort of disability, but instead is just extremely shy about socializing with those who she loves. That's it. Now, I'm not to downplay the seriousness of the conditions that this character could have in order to make her act this way. But between the two, I found the anime version to be much more realistic. And that's kind of the thing that I'm talking about. You can have a show that takes a story and then adds its own little spins here and there, and those little spins could be better than what was there originally. Now, the last thing that I wanted to bring up, which is actually kind of a strange phenomena, is actually the reverse of this whole problem. In this particular situation, we had a new and more manga-faithful adaptation be not universally panned by people, but generally disliked over an original adaptation. And I am, of course, referring to the 2014 anime Sailor Moon Crystal. The original anime adaptation from the 90s is very beloved and is one of the cornerstones in what we know now to be magical girl anime. But in the original anime, similar to long-running shonen, it had many a filler episode and entire seasons of nothing but, seemingly only using the manga material as like a skeletal structure, where everything else was just built around it. In fact, the first 60 episodes of the original Sailor Moon only covers the story of the first 14 chapters from the manga. So the majority of those episodes were more or less entirely original content. And yet I have seen people say, and would probably recommend myself, that people watch the original 90s adaptation over Crystal. Now that could just be because of nostalgia glasses, I admit, but I also think that there's more to it than just that as well. Sailor Moon Crystal fell into this one particular adaptation trap: info dumping. And if you've never heard of that before, info dumping is when large pieces of information are just dumped on you really quickly all at once. It works a lot better in text because it is, well, it's text. You can read it at whatever pace you want. But in anime, that translates to a lot of information in a very short amount of time. You don't have a lot of processing time. And that's a problem with trying to make an adaptation that's too close to the original, because then you have problems like this. And when you compare that to the original adaptation from the 90s, and yeah, you're going to get fan disappointment, whether it follows the manga better or not. Now, these aren't the only examples I have, but they're the bigger ones that I was able to think of, and I don't want to continually harp over this issue that you probably already decided your own opinion on before you even clicked on this video. But going back to the beginning, when people tell me that I shouldn't tell or I shouldn't recommend to anyone to watch the original 2003 adaptation of Fullmetal Alchemist because it doesn't follow the manga, I get frustrated. It's very easy to classify the original adaptation as just a poor adaptation because it did not follow the manga, but it's not a poor adaptation. What it was able to adapt based on what was there at the time, it did brilliantly, and how it was able to round everything up, yes, it wasn't how the mangaka eventually did it, but it still made sense. But I am curious to know your guys' thoughts. Because this is something that frustrates me, it's possible that I'm not looking at this from every angle, and I wouldn't mind some extra thoughts or opinions. But that's basically where I've been standing on the whole thing, and I felt the need to get that out so it didn't, like, clog up the Brotherhood review, which I'm getting to. Yes, we will be having some semblance of comparison between Brotherhood and 2003, because you can't talk about Brotherhood and pretend 2003 doesn't exist. You can do it the other way around, because many people did that. You know, because there was a time period before Brotherhood existed, but you can't really do it the other way around, and I didn't want all this in my head clogging up the review. So I had to get it out, and there it is. And what do you guys think? I want to know. Tell me. Although, you know, knowing my luck, I could post this video, and then there'll be a comment down below or over on Reddit or something from a guy that says, no, you shouldn't watch this video or listen to this guy's opinions because he doesn't like Nozaki-kun, or, you know, something. Either way, let me know down in the comments if you guys have other examples of anime that you think surpassed the manga, either by doing something different or perhaps the exact same thing, just better. Or just place a comment if you have a comment. Really, that's kind of what they're for. I don't know why I said that. Either way, Brotherhood review coming up this weekend, and I'll see you guys then. And until then, stay frosty.